bit of an exam walkthrough. Not going to go on forever. You can pause and rewind if you need to. But for this first question, well, you start with one feature of. So for all your questions, always start by answering the question with part of the question in your answer, like this. And so up to that sentence is 1 mark, and then this is how I've developed it. Basically 2 sentences for 2 marks. Same here, another feature would be separation. Full stop, that's a mark, so I'll be on 3, but then I've developed it with another sentence, so that's 4. You can read those yourself, but basically hard work, e.g. picking oakum, that's on the Quizlet, and separated because they didn't want the workhouse to seem like the easy option, so males and females were in separate parts. 4 marks, bosh, we move on. How useful are sources A and B? Here is source A, here is source B. So we've got a drawing and a government report and a drawing that appeared in a magazine. Well, source A is useful because it shows the immigrants having to rely on charity, somewhere to stay and basic food and a shelter. It also shows a relatively large group, and from my own knowledge I know there were large numbers of immigrants that were struggling in Whitechapel. And it shows specifically Russian Jews, there we go, Russian Jews. And from my own knowledge, I know there were a lot of Russian Jews in Whitechapel at this time because there were pogroms going on in Russia. In Russia, they weren't being treated very well, basically, is what you needed to know. So that's why it is useful. From my own knowledge, I know some of the things that are in that image are true. However, it's an artist's impression. It's not fact. This is what the artist interpreted this scene to look like. Also, they seem fairly well dressed. They don't seem particularly shabby. And when you talk about this, clothed in rags, they don't look particularly shabby. Well, I would expect that that's probably not quite how it looked. Now, it asks you about how useful is it to find about the problems facing immigrants in the Whitechapel area. This says in the East End of London. Whitechapel was in the East End of London, but so were some other places in the East End of London. So it's not necessarily specifically Whitechapel. So that'd be something I'd pick out. It was only Russian Jews that it's showing, whereas there were lots of different types of immigrants that came to Whitechapel at this time because of it being near the docks. And you've got, it's a magazine, and we know that magazines sensationalise things, maybe make things seem a little more interesting than they otherwise would be. So there we go. Now for source B, the government report. Well, useful because it shows working conditions. I'll be taking some quotes out of there. Also, it's a government report, a report sent to a government group. So there's no reason for this person to exaggerate, because this isn't a public document. Only the people that he's reporting to are going to see it. Also, it says about a starvation wage. That's a quote. And we know that people were really, as immigrants, were really struggling to get by in Whitechapel. That the work was unpleasant. We know they did some of the worst jobs. And that they slept in the same room. We know that overcrowding was a problem in Whitechapel at this time. However, it does also say that these workshops where they worked were a danger to the community, which seems a bit far-fetched. Why would a workshop be such a danger to the community? I mean, you could argue when it's talking about fumes and burning rubbish, but it doesn't really specify why it's a danger to the community. Only one report, one person's opinion. So yeah, it's talking about workshops, but it's just Herbert Evans' opinion on these workshops. Maybe if you'd asked the immigrants, they would have said, well, these aren't bad compared to where we've come from. And it doesn't specify Whitechapel. It says he's done an inspection into factories and an official report on immigration, but it doesn't say this was in Whitechapel. And it's been asking you about immigrants in the Whitechapel area. So there's that. And for this first part of the video, this is what people forget to focus on. You're being asked, this is the question, forget the rest of it, this is the question. How could you follow up source B to find out more about the problems facing immigrants in the Whitechapel area? And then it gives you some prompts. Well, what would I follow up? Sleep in same room. I would write more than that. The little follow-up was that it says that they all, quote, slept in the same room. Is this really the case? Question, was overcrowding such a large problem for many migrants? Question mark. Why have I chosen that question? Because I know I can answer it with a census. How this might help answer my question? Well, a census tells us who lived where and how many lived in a property. Therefore, it would tell us whether people were living in overcrowded conditions. And there we go, that's part 1.